Welcome to Getting Better with Dr. Adam. Dr. Adam Silberstein is a clinical psychologist who has been working in the field since 1993. With a broad range of clinical experience, including state psychiatric hospitals, adolescent residential treatment with a trauma focus, the Department of Corrections, and in the addiction treatment arena. Adam is currently in private practice and serves as a clinical consultant and supervisor for a number of treatment centers. This podcast is for general information and entertainment purposes only. This should not be considered treatment advice, nor is it a substitute for an individual treatment plan. If you have questions or concerns about your individual situation, it is strongly recommended you consult a licensed professional to talk about things that are specific to you. If there is an emergency, it is strongly recommended you seek treatment at your nearest emergency room.
Dr. Eric Proescher was our guest on Getting Better with Dr. Adam, and I really encourage you to listen. He's got a really decorated career, is an expert in trauma, works for the VA, was a military psychologist, was employed at Guantanamo Bay, has a master's in public health, is involved in research. And I actually didn't speak to him about any of that. I spoke to him about his dissertation, which was based on his interest in procrastination and understanding procrastination in a non-cookie cutter way. Hear him out. There's a lot of ideas. I think we have a tendency to just pigeonhole people into you are the procrastinator and just sort of leave it at that. And it's all about, just do it. And his understanding of procrastination being a complex issue that doesn't have one specific source, followed by his strategies of how to reach people based on how to understand how they relate to both internal and external expectations is so helpful. It's helpful for anybody in a relationship. It's also helpful for any clinician who is listening. So I hope you enjoy this great podcast with Dr. Eric Proescher. Today, I am so fortunate to have my esteemed colleague, Dr. Eric Proescher, here on Getting Better with Dr. Adam. And this is an amazing, amazing opportunity for me. And it's also, what a bio. Dr. Proescher, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
A little bit about myself?
Yeah.
Well, let's see. For the last 14 years, I've worked for the VA as a psychologist. I work in a post-deployment clinic working with younger post-9/11 veterans that come back from combat zones. I specialize in trauma and PTSD. And before that, I was an active duty Navy psychologist that I was an officer that worked in branch medical clinic, and I was deployed in the service of Operation Enduring Freedom, and was in the Navy between day before 9/11, which
Wow.
was interesting, point to 2005, June or July 2005, when I got discharged honorably.
Honorably.
Yes. And before that, let's see, I taught for a year and worked with severe mental illness. I worked with children, adolescents. I did a fellowship working with children in school mental health.
And also, just to add a little bit, I know that you didn't say this, but in the Navy, you were also deployed at Guantanamo Bay as a psychologist. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Wow. And all that to say, here's which is so decorated. My esteemed colleague has all this great experience, and I'm actually not going to be talking about any of it, right? Right? I'm not going to showcase this piece of it. This is not why I called. Can we get a little personal?
Sure.
So here's the truth of it. Eric and I, Dr. Eric Proescher and I, went to graduate school together in Chicago. And, we all had these dissertations and projects to complete at the end of our training. and, just trying to get through. I remember trying to get through and just finish. And you had this interest in, hey, I want to write about procrastination. And I was thinking, like, who writes about procrastination, number one? And that's really, really interesting. That's really interesting. Now, fast forward for me, right? How many years are we? I think we graduated in 1996-ish, or around there, right? 1998 for me, where I formally finished all sealed, and everything approved. So we're 20 years later, right? And I notice that, like, how many people, I'm in private practice, and in any capacity, that I've worked, Dr. Eric Proescher was writing about something interesting back then. Maybe I didn't have the wisdom back then to see how interesting it is, but hey, people come in with a lot of talking about things that they're never going to do, right? So many people are talking about that which they won't do, and they have big dreams, or it could be big dreams that they never do. It could just be basic. I want to execute. I can't. I just don't do it. Yeah. So tell us about what's this interest in procrastination?
Yeah. Well, it's funny how I stumbled upon the project, and in the sense that I was already involved in some other thesis, and I was collecting data on some kind of HIV prevention project, and it just was taking forever to get data. And I realized, like, I wasn't going to graduate in time. By the time, it was going to be 2 years before this project was over, and I needed to get something done. So I switched, and my dissertation chair was not very helpful. So I switched over, and I'm like, well, what can I write about, And I was interested in, an old-fashioned theory, psychoanalytic theory, which I think is very relevant to today.
Before you go there, Dr. Proescher, we're talking about the path of least resistance, the thing that you did that was actually less work to just get it done.
Just to get it done, exactly.
So it's not where your heart was, but it's what you needed. It
wasn't where the heart was. I'm not a procrastinator myself. That's not a problem I've ever had. But I did have a close friend that I dedicated the dissertation to, who was a chronic procrastinator that had suffered greatly in his life, with procrastination, because procrastination, like, has a couple components. Like, when you think about it, like, there's, this delayed action that happens, and then it's resulting in some kind of substandard behavioral product, and then and it's usually something important to the procrastinator, and it results in a state of emotional upset. And this was always happening he was a friend at the time and a mentor that I met in my undergraduate. It took him 9 years to complete undergraduate, and I think I graduated 6 months before him. I went through in 4 years.
You graduated graduate school before he finished his undergrad.
Something like that.
So hold on a second. So you just said a lot. You broke it down into basic ingredients, and so there's. You actually just said 3 ingredients that are involved in the procrastination cycle, right? So can you recap what are the ingredients of procrastination?
Well, there's some components. The first is there's a postponement. There's a sequence of a behavioral sequence that's postponed, right? You're supposed to do something, you don't do it.
Okay.
It's resulting in.
Okay, so that's number one. I have something to do, I'm just not doing it. Okay, good. Got it.
And then usually it's resulting, there's this idea that, like, well, if I would have had more time, then I would have a better product. Something would have come of this, right? So there's some kind of substandard product that is a result of this delayed effort. Or maybe sometimes there's no product at all. And what happens is the task that must be completed is usually important to perform. And then this results in a state of an emotional upset because of it not being done, or the consequences of it not being done.
Okay, so I postponed something, and then in the second component of it, you're saying that there's going to be a disappointment in the product. So if it's a paper I'm writing, it's not going to be my A game, and you're confident though that the 11th hour or whatever hour that the procrastinator is starting to do the work, it will result in a substandard product, even if I get the A sort of thing. It's not my best. And then it results in a state of emotional upset. Can you speak more to the emotional upset?
Yeah, I mean, usually, with my friend, it was like, it's routinely, like I said, it took him 9 years to get through undergraduate. He'd failed a number of classes. His parents had invested all this money in his school, was paying for him to be in school, and he had to retake a number of these classes over the 9 years, And so he was not only upset about it, but of course his parents are very upset about it.
Right. So it's not the true procrastinator as a way of being, right? This isn't, he probably wasn't just a procrastinator at school.
Right. The way we do anything is the way we do everything. And exactly, this guy procrastinated on everything. And I remember, so like I said, at the time I was psychoanalytic or psychodynamic way of thinking about things tries to get to the core of kind of the underlying reasons that motivate the complexity of the human psyche. And I remember one day outside of one of our favorite philosophy professor, who happened to be a psychoanalytically oriented guy, and my friend was complaining that, he had this big final due, and, that's the most important thing in his life right now. And he's got all this other stuff going on in his life, but and his girlfriend, who was giving him a lot of problems, was on the bottom of his list.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, he still can't get this paper done. He can't get motivated to get started or whatever. I remember my psychoanalytic professor, Dr. Boothby, I remember him just like taking a puff of his cigarette, blowing a thing of smoke in the air and saying, well, actually, I think you have everything upside down. That, in fact, this paper is the last thing that's on your mind, and your girlfriend is the number one thing that you're consumed with, And my friend was like, what? And he first resisted, and he's like, oh, my God, he is right. This is the last thing I want to do,
So he's selling to you guys. He's selling it as, oh, my God, I have this paper. And you have this professor who calls him out and says, actually, it's not the paper. It's, you're acting like your relationship is priority, the last priority. It's all, you have it all backwards. This is the true thing you're dealing with, not the paper.
Exactly. And that was like one of those sort of kind of, wow, I need to understand more how people think about these things. And that's when I went to school and started studying. And then this project is one of the things that resulted in my studies. But
can I ask you a question about that?
One of the things here that we find out too from this perspective is that there's some self-deception that's involved, right? That humans have a tremendous capacity to deceive themselves. We tell ourselves stories, and sometimes those stories just aren't true.
Okay, so here's my question, and I'm sorry for interrupting. So you have him, what's the content of his thought life when the final is about, he's not preparing for the final is, oh my God, what about the final? And that's getting the most airtime. So if I'm in his head, the thoughts that are ringing, I'm listening to, oh my God, what about the final? In reality, you're saying that's not the real deal. That's not what's really going on. And that's an element of self-deception. But if that's the content, right? If that's what I'm thinking about, how is that self-deception?
Say that again?
So if I'm thinking about the final, right? I'm him, right? You're saying the philosophy professor says it's got to be the girlfriend, right? It's got to be.
I can't read people's minds. I don't really know what he was thinking. Maybe the philosophy professor was saying, like, no, you're actually thinking about your girlfriend, and now that this is coming up, you're saying you're thinking about this, but that's not the case.
But really what I'm asking is, how does the self-deception piece is what you're highlighting, and
Yes.
and it could be that I'm swimming in the content of oh my gosh, when am I going to do this? When am I going to do this? Or I'm ignoring it and so forth, whatever it is. But how is self-deception at play in procrastination?
Well, it really depends on there are different explanations that I discovered in the literature from psychoanalytic perspective about how self-deception relates to procrastination. So you'd like me to run down
I'd love to learn. Yes,
It's been 20 years since I thought about this, so give me some leeway to if I don't.
You've been busy dealing with combat vets and other things, and yes, you have our permission to refresh yourself.
Okay, so let's see. Why don't we start off with where everyone starts off with Freud? And Freud, he although he didn't pay a lot of attention to say procrastination, because this procrastination itself isn't a mental illness or a psychiatric condition. Freud was the first to note, from my understanding, that procrastination was a part of a more serious problem, a more serious illness, which he called compulsive neurosis, which is what we call obsessive compulsive personality disorder.
Interesting. And
from Freud's perspective, the compulsive rituals, and that's often like, right, the person, you're supposed to be somewhere, but he's checking his door over and over again, or he's washing his hands, right? He's not getting to, being able to meet their goals. From Freud's perspective, this was these compulsive rituals were like miscarriage efforts at defenses against impulses, instinctual, aggressive, and sexual impulses that were disguised to the ego. And so from that perspective, disguised to the ego is what we're talking about as self-deception, right? And Freud's view of the human psyche is that we are complex individuals, and we have impulses, thoughts that are thought but not known, or unknown thoughts that influence our behaviors. And this is why he was so curious about, people's bungled actions, or the things that they say when they're not trying to say anything, the things they do by accident. He's like, that these aren't accidents, that these are meaningful and intentional, and that they reflect some underlying business that's going on in the person's world that it's closer to the truth. And so from that perspective, that the procrastination, from Freud thought that we have an idea, we would have an intention. Every intention and every idea we have, we have a counter idea and a counter intention that runs on another universe in our psyche, like the bizarre world,
Mm-hmm.
So if and you see this all the time, right? You talk to people. My wife the other day, we had a disagreement about something. She's like, "I'm not angry." She tells me she's not angry, but for her to know that she wasn't angry, where did the idea of anger come from? In some way, she was negating an impulse that was already there.
Uh-huh.
Right? And so that's how you see this kind of dialectical thinking that happens, where there is something there, but that implies the opposite might have also be there as well.
I love talking to you, and I love the way I'm remembering the way you're such a clear thinker, And so take me. That's very interesting. So just whatever is presented, right? It on some level expresses the polar opposite. So if I'm so happy, I pronounce I'm so happy, right? Like I declare it on some level. Maybe I'm not, right? So how does that in your opinion, how does this play out in procrastination?
I just picked up my dissertation, and I have a quote here that I just turned to randomly. We're talking about this very same thing. It's a quote from Freud, and I'm going to read it to you. If an intense love is opposed by an almost equally powerful hatred and is at the same time inseparably bound up with it, the immediate consequence is certain to be a paralysis of the will, and an incapacity for coming to a decision upon any of those actions for which love ought to provide the motive power. But this indecision will not confine itself for long to a single group of actions. For in the first place, what actions of a lover are not brought into relation with one principal motive? And secondly, a man's attitude in sexual things has the force of a model to which the rest of his reactions tend to conform. And thirdly, it is an inherent characteristic in the psychology of the obsessional neurotic to make the fullest possible use of the mechanism of displacement. So the paralysis of his powers of decision gradually extends itself over to the entire field of the patient's behavior.
So simplify that for those who can't grasp that, which my brain can't unpack that. What is Freud saying?
In short, Freud is saying the procrastinator, which the obsession of the procrastinator, this conflict in the mind impedes one's ability to complete tasks. It serves to block the apprehension and acceptance of ambivalence towards important people in your life.
So it's a displacement. I can't.
When it's in relationship to love, right? You often see this, like someone that's about to, proposes to their fiance and then just procrastinates on putting the ceremony together and the wedding and so on and so forth. That would be an example of that.
Okay. And for the person who doesn't complete tasks at work, what do you think that would be an example of?
Well, okay. Like I said, there's many explanations, and you want this nice, simple kind of, hey, there's the cookbook, here's A, there's B, there's C, and in the reality, what I concluded, is that there's many reasons why people procrastinate. On the one end of the personality spectrum, you have this kind of over-controlled, rigid, obsessional kind of person that is not self-aware and has ambivalent emotions about tasks and people in their lives. But one of the things I didn't recognize in my dissertation later on, I recognized that there was another type of procrastination, and this was connected to the other side of the spectrum, a more inattentive ADHD type person, right? Who is excited about so many things, but doesn't have kind of like the mental attentional capacity to hone in and to follow through on one thing. And one could see this in the psychoanalytic world. I think it was Adam Phillips who talked about, he had 3 essays on flirtation, and I compared this type of procrastinator to the flirt. The flirt is one who tries to sustain the possibilities without committing to anyone. So kind of lived in this ideal fantasy world. And where the commitment to any one thing would close the doors of fantasy.
So if I actually really follow through, I'm kind of stuck. I'll have buyer's remorse, right? I'm screwed. Yeah. I'm screwed if I truly commit, because I really, really, really am intoxicated by the idea of opportunity, the potential, the fantasy.
Yes.
Right? So I'll just flirt that word, flirt around the idea of discussion of the novelty. I like the novelty, the potential. I love the excitement around that, but commitment actually gets me in trouble because that means I'm on a path, right?
Yes.
And that's so we have different ideas. What you're saying, and I have to think harder in this one. I'm telling the people who are with me, I'm actually, my brain is having to work harder to understand what you're saying. But you have this struggle with an ambivalence, right, in relationship could be one. And could be, there are different ways of looking at procrastination. You nailed me and you said, don't try to pigeonhole me. That's very, very simplistic. Don't do it. So one way would be there's an ambivalence and I'm stuck and I'm not at peace with it, and it's reflected in my indecision, right, and my postponement. And another one is is very different than that one, right? The one of like we are talking about an engagement where you just keep pushing it off, and it represents ambivalence in the relationship, and you're not at peace with it. Another one is very, very different, which is I love fantasy of opportunity and the excitement of the novelty. If I actually do commit, I'm going to get in trouble. And I'm going to be very disappointed.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. And there's another explanation too. And this is one that I thought was quite interesting when you go into the history. Procrastination, the term comes into parlance in around the 17th century. And nowadays when we talk about procrastination, there's pretty much there's always a negative connotation associated with procrastination. But this negative connotation has not always been represented in our language and our culture. So one meaning of procrastination procrastination actually came from a farming term. And it was used in farming, and it was the English verb procrastinate is rooted in a Latin verb, procrastinare, which the prefix is pro, denoting a forward motion, and crastinus, meaning tomorrow. But it was a positive term in farming, like when the farmer would avoid or delayed planting their seeds, because sometimes if you plant your seeds too early, there was storms that will come out and wipe out all the seeds, and then that was wasted. So sometimes it was good to procrastinate because you would miss the bad weather, and then your crops it wasn't a waste of time, and you would have healthy crops, and so on and so forth. And so I thought that was quite interesting. Because usually when we hear about procrastination, it's a problem. And there is one psychoanalytic explanation that looked at this idea as procrastination as some kind of psychosocial moratorium. And it's this guy named Peter Giovacchini, who's a Chicago psychoanalyst, was really popular in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And he actually, I found some literature, a paper that he wrote that talked about procrastination as a psychosocial moratorium during late adolescence.
What does that mean?
Well, I'm going to explain it right now. That he thought it was a developmental phase that when young adults get to a certain age, they're in this in-between stage where they're not completely adults, they're not children anymore, and they try on things. And that's part of growing up, picking up new habits, failing at some things, trying new interests. Some interests bear out, others you lose them. And so that this was a healthy thing, a healthy part of development is this procrastination that comes out in this developmental stage of life. and that you know, and you see these often just depicted in movies where, you know, what was that one movie, Failure to Thrive, where you had Matthew McConaughey still living in his parents' house, not really finding the career path that motivate him, not committing to any relationships. Well, from Dr. Giovacchini's perspective, this is an important time, and it's a learning, and finding out what's important to you. What are your values? What are you willing to live and die for?
So
Does that make sense?
it so does. So late adolescence, I work a lot in dual diagnosis addiction world, and we have a label. We put a label on people often called failure to launch, and they come in and they're characterized as individuals who can't mobilize. So they don't follow through. Oftentimes they're branded ADHD, and they don't have. They're not necessarily. When I think of the typical person that I'm just a typical young adult, late adolescent, they don't really have a history of following through on anything. Meaning, like, they don't have job histories, they don't have sports team histories. They bounce from thing to thing. Oftentimes, they want to do something like they'll say something music, right? They'll say something like, I want to be a DJ, and they don't really. They move towards it a little, and then they want to be something else, and then they want to be a sound engineer, and they just get different ideas, and we put them in this box of, well, if you just learned how to follow through and stay on one path, you would feel so much better, and that's our treatment plan. How do we help you move from point A to point B? You're saying what you're reading of is that there's this. What was his name? The psychologist from Chicago?
Peter Giovacchini.
So he would say, right?
Giovacchini.
Right. So that position would be, no, that's actually developmentally appropriate. Try on different hats, do a little bit, and just see what lands.
Yes.
Right. And it's not actually the label that we may be putting on it may be short-sighted.
But Giovacchini did distinguish between productive procrastination, that's what we're talking about now, from other forms of helpless stagnation. And he thought that the pathological part, the helpless stagnation, was due to the failure of further ego integration, and it was more characteristic of a more severe pathology.
What did he call that? Helpless
stagnation.
Helpless stagnation. So that would be something where it's like that's procrastination gone awry. That's like I really, really, really am crippled. And versus productive procrastination, which seems to me to be about trying on different hats age appropriately, right? Like seeing what fits from an identity standpoint, not to shut that down, right? But to actually encourage it. So and this is in line with what you're talking about. I like that you went to the origination of the word. That's sort of a thoughtful, a mindful pause. The original procrastination, the way you described it, is a mindful pause that actually is sort of a delaying of impulse in a thoughtful, practical, and helpful way. Like it's a good business decision. You don't have to just you don't have to get the task done. Give it some time, and so in your understanding of procrastination, it's not always a quote unquote bad thing, right? It actually could have a positive.
Yes. And the helpless stagnation, of course, he was looking at Erik Erikson's developmental model, and he thought that, sometimes people get stuck in earlier stages, so they didn't really master those developmental needs at those stages for a variety of reasons, failed attachment relationships. I'm thinking the modern day application of this theory is like taking a look at our helicopter parents and our bulldozer parents with the Generation Internet Generation Z, where there's so much parental influence that bombards and overwhelms these kids that where the child really struggles with self-differentiating what they want versus what their parents want, and that, this was a struggle that Eric Erickson and Joe Bikini thought was an important struggle to that how the child matures and develops and goes through that is learns how to distinguish self from other, distinguish what's important for them versus what's important for their parents expectations or external expectations. But some people don't do that, right? We know adults that still have this challenge, right? That put their needs on the shelf to address the needs of others. And so you can often see that procrastination could be symptomatic in that kind of context.
Where I neglect myself and my own, my own pursuit of identity and my own pursuit of interests, right? As you're talking, I'm going to throw my parents under the bus. They're great people. I just want to say for the record, they're great people. But I remember I have a very, very intelligent brother who is just all over the place and has so many interests. He bounces from thing to thing, and he's just interested. He's so interested, and he's a wealth of information, and he knows a lot about a lot type of guy. And he's a very successful physician, and you want him he's an ICU doctor. If you're sick in the hospital, you want him. And when he was growing up, I remember he always had, oh, is that a new phase? Oh, what's he into now? Right? Like, oh, is this what book is he into now? And there was, it was sort of, we were mocking him for his, bouncing from interest to interest. Right. And,
yes.
And in a way, right, the helicopter parent that you're describing is doing a disservice, and really, really controlling and shaping to the parent liking, right? This is where,
exactly.
Hey, you said you were interested in this. We're going to take it all the way through, but
That's right.
You're not giving them the latitude to explore.
Right. Exactly. Free play is so important. Free play is one of the things that's virtually is disappearing and on the playgrounds, in the schools. Everything's so supervised and restricted. Remember when we were kids, man? Shoot, we would, during the summer, we would leave the house at 9, and then I wouldn't come back till dark. And we would play with other kids in the neighborhood all day. And that play was important, right? You learn some very essential skills in kind of exploring the fantasy collectively with other kids, and knowing that, hey, to be there is voluntarily. So if you don't treat everyone right, everyone doesn't have a role, they're going to leave. And sometimes you need everyone there to play the game, So you learn some very important skills in managing relationships through free play.
So here, Dr. Eric Proescher, in a world of helicopter parents, in a world of very, very goal-oriented, driven, how do I meet my goals? How do I meet my numbers? Is introducing or encouraging is a better word, encouraging this notion of exploration and arrive and self exploration, not imposed upon exploration, and so to arrive at what I truly believe in and what I truly care about, right? To create my own meaning instead of having it imposed upon me.
Absolutely.
That's an interesting thing. So I want to take it to the realm of clinicians. You saw me, and I'll say it again, you nailed me earlier. Please give me the prescription.
Something, do something.
Right? Because I know. It's just easier that way, you know what I mean? You get so heady and all of these ideas, and I just give me the cookbook. Give me the cookbook, Dr. Proescher. Just tell me what to do.
The cookbooks don't work. You have a whole shelf full of them, and it would only be one. If the cookbooks work, people would be going to it and using it. But it's not.
That's true. So we got people. Let's talk to clinicians here, right? So part of this getting better to get better, right?
Oh, let me tell you about this one some ideas that that I was exposed to recently, and it's kind of changed my life.
Okay, but I want, just so we don't lose sight of things, right? I want to just.
No, I'll connect it to procrastination.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not even saying that. I want you to. I'm going to give a request right now. I want you to also connect it. Think about, as you're saying this, what what typical clinician. There's where I am in Los Angeles. There's so many of us, right? And there are so many people that have people coming in the office wanting, and they're like, okay, we're going to create an activity schedule, and we're going to get you to, and today you're going to do this, and tomorrow you're going to do this, and each day you're going to check in on me, and we're going to. You can even reach out to me just to, if I'm more coachy in my practice, you can even reach out to me, and and it's all great and it's exciting, and then a week later nothing happens.
Behavioral theory and practice is so popular and so ineffective, right? So for procrastination.
Okay, so that being said, please.
Because it assumes that, like the reason you're not doing this is that there's some kind of, you're not thinking about it correctly, or you're not breaking things down into smaller tasks. For the most part, people, if they could do it themselves, they would do it. And this is where I came to the work of Gretchen Rubin, who, the funny thing is, she's a lawyer, and she has written a book and developed a theory called 4 tendencies that has really helps me understand my patients better, my wife, in terms of how they manage. You can think of how they manage expectations. 4 tendencies is about how people manage expectations. Expectations that are both external and expectations are both internal. So external is the boss says, hey, I need that report on my desk by Friday. That's an external expectation. An internal expectation is like, hey, I want to lose 20 pounds on my New Year's resolution, before the month of May. That is an internal expectation, right?
Got it.
So, and Gretchen Rubin, the 4 tendencies, she described 4 types of personalities. And then the differences are how they manage these expectations. The first type is one of the rarest, and that's me.
Oh, you're so special.
I'm a special. We are upholders. And upholders balance internal and external expectations. We're able to meet both. We don't have problems with procrastination. We have an idea, we go for it, and we follow through. If someone wants us to do something and we agree with it and it fits with our own, we will do that too. So the upholders, these are, the therapists aren't going to see upholders in their office for these things, right? The upholders are probably the ones that would benefit from self-help books or something like that, because they're self-starters and they can do it on their own. The next category are what we call obligers. And obligers do very well. They meet external expectations. But the problem is they have a hard time meeting their internal expectations. The reality is that they put their own goals on the shelf, on the back burner, because they're too busy addressing the goals of expectations that are imposed on them from the outside, right?
Yes.
And, so my boss is an obliger. This guy is great. I would come in and I would have a question about something. I could be lazy. I could research it myself, but I would just ask him. And if he didn't know it, man, he would go home and he would research it, and so we would have an answer for me the next day. And I'm like, great, he did all that research for me. But
so I want to hire obligers.
You want to hire, and they make good bosses too.
Yeah.
So while he's spending all this time answering my questions, he's not getting his goals, his things done or met, his expectations.
His internal expectations are being neglected.
Exactly. And then you have the next 2 categories. The next category is our questioners. And you might be a questioner. Questioners essentially collapse all expectations into internal, right? So, meaning that questioners only follow through with expectations that make sense to them. So It could be internal. If it's external, if it makes sense to them, if they have a rationale for it, they'll do it. So that's the thing about questioners.
How come you give yourself the nice one and you give me the it's less attractive what you're giving me?
No, it's a good one. It has to make sense to them.
Okay.
They only follow if it makes sense to them. So here's the thing. Sometimes, they don't always communicate with them. I have a buddy that we work together, and he's a questioner, and I'd be like, hey, I want that report. Give me that report by Friday. And he's like, okay. Or by Friday. And then Friday comes around, the report's not there. I'm like, dude, you said you're going to have the report during Friday. He goes, look, I know. He goes, you'll have it on Monday. I know you don't really need it till Tuesday, so you'll have it on Monday. So, it didn't make sense to him to do it on Friday if he could have the whole weekend to do it on Monday. But he didn't communicate that to me, So for an upholder, that's very frustrating.
So for an obliger would never do that. Right, an upholder and the obliger, that's out of the question. For the questioner, it's like, well, it doesn't make sense to me, so I'm not going to honor you. Right?
Exactly.
It has to for me to honor you, it has to make sense to me.
Exactly. Perfect.
And both internally and externally. So if it doesn't make sense to me to lose 20 pounds, then I'm not going to do it. But if it makes sense, I'm going to find the reason to do it.
Exactly. So, here you're getting an idea of how you work with these people in therapy. Once you know this, okay, well, you got to make something, you got to give them a rationale that makes sense to them, right?
Uh-huh.
Let me tell you about the last one, and we'll talk about how you approach all four of these in terms of procrastination. The last one, it was my wife.
Can I just tell you, Dr. Proescher, you really, I assume if this goes viral, then you will have people listening to this, including your wife and your bosses and your colleagues and your friends. I'm just telling you that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I don't care.
Okay, cool.
Here's what you got. You got nothing to hide. So, or what you hear. So the last one is rebel. Rebels resist all expectations, internal and external. Out of all the four, they're the most authentic. They keep it real. They do what they feel like in the moment. They're totally emotional reasoners. The problem is how they feel changes moment to moment. So 1 minute they might feel like this, and the next minute they might feel another thing. So for me, it's I don't know how I got paired up with a rebel. It's the most unlikely pair between an upholder and a rebel because they all expectations. I'll give you an example. My wife will call me up and she'll be like, "Hey, I want to pick you up something for dinner. What would you like?" And I'm like, "Oh, great." I'm all excited, and I give her very specific details, because I don't like certain things, and I think she's taking the order, and then and I'll get home, and this happens routinely, every week. Either something that I didn't order, or there's nothing there because she goes, "Oh, I changed my mind. I didn't feel like doing that." And rarely is it the very thing that I asked her for, And so, we used to get in fights about this all the time. And the more I as an upholder, I was just like, no, I just need to give her more information, more detail, and be specific. And that just didn't work. And then I realized that she was a rebel. And so one of the things I do to adjust my own happiness is adjust my expectations. When she calls me and asks me for something, I tell myself, okay, this may or may not be what I get. And that has really changed my happiness in the relationship. Okay, I don't have to worry about this because I have plan B already. And that's the way I have to manage my life.
So just to give you a sense of the room here, the producer who works with me, Katie Berenson, we both have smiles. We're smiling ear to ear. So this is a podcast. You can't see it. We're both laughing at this, hey, I just manage my expectations. I expect nothing. And it's so much better.
Yeah.
I have no standards. I don't have to have any standards because, hey, I got a rebel, and a rebel it's hit or miss.
That's right.
Yeah.
But the other thing that's very interesting, if I ever really want to get my wife to do something, I can think ahead. Out of all four, the rebels are the most easy to manipulate.
Why
Really
is that?
talking about the dialectical thinking. You just tell them to do something. Tell them whatever you want them to do. You tell them to do the opposite. And I'm not 9 out of 10 times. This is 10 out of 10 times. They will do the opposite.
So they'll show you, hey, I want a salad. Hey, I want a sandwich. I'll make him a salad.
If I really want something, I would say, look, I don't think you're going to get this right anyway, so don't even bother. She's like, what? What do you want? No, I want the salad with, extra tempeh and goat cheese or whatever, but I don't think you can handle it. Forget it. Just forget it. I'll get it myself. And every time it will be exactly what I asked for.
And why? What are you drawing on in that?
What do you mean? What am I drawing?
No, I'm saying why is that? Why does that work?
I told you, she's a rebel. She resists everything.
So once you say you can't do it, right?
You give her a choice. You don't give her a choice, and she will make the choice. Right?
Right. Oh, you take away the option of choice.
This is reverse psychology.
Yeah.
Right? We've known this for years. It's what we do with kids.
You're not going to be able to do it, therefore it gets done.
Yep.
Right. So and as we're saying these things, I think what's coming up for me at least is like, wow, like I'm glad he called me a questioner, not the best. I'd rather be, an upholder, but thank God I'm not a rebel. Right. And I wonder if the author of this theory.
The funny thing is, rebels are most proud. They love being rebels.
Yeah. Right. They don't look at it. I'm coming from my perspective, which is I want to be the upholder. That's the person who's just going to get it done no matter what. I'll take questioner because at least I know internally when I do something, it feels right to me, right? If I'm a questioner, I may neglect you. Yeah. I may neglect your needs, but at least it's going to sit right with me, right? I may change the rules up based on what you're saying. It has to make sense to me. I don't love that part of it, right? I can see nothing wrong with an upholder. Right.
The funny thing is, when I've talked to people, only the obligers are the only people that don't like who they are.
The obligers really neglect themselves, meaning they're just
so
big. They don't. Right.
They can never get anything done for themselves.
So the rebel, interestingly, doesn't really. So if I told the rebel, if I said to you, "You're a rebel," there wouldn't be a shame, and they'd be like, "Yeah, I am."
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And upholder sounds like it always wins. Of course, you put yourself in that category. But upholder sounds like, how could you lose as an upholder?
Well, the problem with an upholder is we're always looking for rules. And sometimes there's situations where there are no rules. And we'll impose rules. We'll act like there's rules when there are none. And that's what's been helpful and kind of nice being with my wife, who's a rebel, where, like, I'll be standing there, and she's like, what are you doing? She'll just like, why are you standing in line? She'll walk right up the front, and I'm like, oh, what are you doing? You can't do that. And hell if she can't. She just did it,
Yeah.
So it's nice that she helps me kind of break my rigidity, and helps me see that sometimes there are no rules, or the rules that I thought that I'm imposing aren't really there.
So you just made me feel better as a questioner, by the way. You made me, because I will make sense. It has to make sense to me, and it really has to make sense to me. So I'm not just in rebel chaos. I do have rules, but they make sense to me. You're going to follow the rule whether they make sense or not, because it's a rule.
Right.
I get it. Right. So it's not all or nothing on all these things. Each one of them has a benefit. An obliger boss is a great boss and can feel really good about being a boss.
Exactly.
Got it. So how do you plug this into procrastination?
Well, like I said, the upholders usually don't have problems with procrastination. As long as they set the goal, right? The obligers don't have problems with procrastination when it relates to getting things done for other people. It's just for themselves.
So they may be a weight loss case coming in. But I can't lose weight.
Exactly. So if you're working, like I just had lunch with my boss, and I told him, look, he's been trying to lose weight and he can't. And I'm like, we're going to sign up to the gym together. You're going to come with me. So I just made his goal, and I just made his internal expectation an external. He's doing it for me, not for himself.
Right, and that's the way he rolls. You're not trying to change it. And what I like about it, you're not trying to change him. You're just saying, what's your pattern? If I have this framework, I can definitely understand that if I make it an internal expectation, you're going to neglect yourself. But if I make it an external expectation, you're coming with me as an obliger, you're going to go.
Exactly.
And because you're flexible, you could be both. You have both the external and the internal. You don't mind putting yourself in that situation because you're going to show up to the appointment because you show up anyways.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So then you have the questioners. You just got to give them a rationale that makes sense to them. Once they find that, they don't have problems with procrastinating. So that's the trigger. You need to really help and understand the questioner, what their values are, what's important to them, what their aspirations are, and put it in those terms.
And the rebel?
From the rebel, give up on the rebel. No, with the rebel, with my wife, like I said, we said before, I just use reverse psychology.
Right. So take that into practice where you're not married to the person and you see a rebel come into your office. Like, in the addiction world, we have people who do not like rules, right? I don't want to, and very driven by different, whatever the flavor of the emotion of the minute is, right? So how would you work with that?
Well, I would be using a lot of paradoxical interventions. Things like, I don't know if you're ready for this program yet. This really requires some skills and capacities that you're just not right at that point yet. Stuff like that. That kind of stuff stirs up the rebel. Where they're like, "I'll show you, I can do it. I'll show you." So it's so funny.
Right. A lot of our talk is you don't seem, hey, the way you're showing, you don't seem ready. By the way, this doesn't look like someone who's taking this seriously. By the way, if I had, I'll say things like if I were going to have the textbook, if we were going to do a video of the how to approach, recovery, where do you think you stand? Right. And so you're saying that for the rebel, that invites an I'll show you.
Yeah.
And then reverse psychology, getting it done.
And also appealing to their values, like where they are, what's important to them. Problem is it changes moment to moment. But understand them, where they are, like what's going on, what's important, what would you like to get out of this, and constantly steering them back to that, constantly coming back to that.
So interesting. This is, we're all shaking our heads here in our setting with very different, in the clinical setting one of the clinical settings I'm in, this is such a common struggle, right? And even for any struggle, right? The idea, whether it's procrastination or otherwise, the idea of here's what I'm hearing. Don't try to make procrastination one thing. It could be the result of a variety of things, right? It could be about an ambivalence. It could be about a retention of excitement and fantasy. So don't make it one thing. You're best off clinically, right? And whether, as a clinician listening to this, or even as anybody, is knowing who you are. Both me, if I know who I am, my approach to external expectations and internal expectations, if I know how I roll, and I don't have to take it personally, right? Like if I'm a questioner, so be it. And if there's an element in a questioner of being a little bit selfish and not reflecting on the other, having empathy, I could work on that, but I got to know that that's kind of my reflex. And how am I going to best work with myself on that? And as a clinician, if I understand who's walking into the room, it probably will not be an upholder, right? Like you said, it will more likely be a someone who struggles in the rebellious way or the obliger way, right? Most likely.
Right.
then just knowing how someone rolls instead of, and here's the main take home point for me. If I'm not thoughtful about it and I'm just trying to plug it in like in a task calendar, and I keep being
Yeah.
told like, fill out this calendar, sit here and fill out the calendar with me. I can do that till the end of time. Not only am I going to not retain my client patient, I'm also not going to help them, right? Because it's just not a thoughtful approach. So I really have to understand who's in the room with me.
Exactly. You got to meet people where they are.
So, and for clarity, this information, this understanding of internal versus external, wasn't around when you wrote your dissertation.
No, it was not around. This is new.
So this is the addendum.
Yeah, this is the addendum.
So where you left it in the beginning was, I have this friend, now I understand him. Interesting, right? Now in practice, you have more of a model of understanding that actually helps people.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Is there anything you want to add to this?
Anything that I want to add?
Because you did flirt with one more idea, right? Which was, some of this is an imposed. There are certain values that are imposed in terms of what's considered, a good product as a human in our United States of America, right, or in the Western world. Do you see that as what's your understanding of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing I hinted at in my dissertation, was that procrastination can only be understood in a cultural context, and we live in the Western culture where zeitgeist is time is of the essence. Every procrastination only makes sense in a time limited fashion. Things are so much faster now. We want immediate gratification, and it's not like this everywhere else. In the East, and we might think of time as a field to go fishing in. I always remember one of the professors at our program was talking about cultural differences and talking about South America, and how there was this one guy that, and he was Latino too, that he always considered him so rude because they would have a lunch date, and this guy would inevitably show up always 45 minutes. And he's like, how could he leave? And one day he got so upset, he confronted this friend and said, hey, you were so inconsiderate, you were so rude, you left me here 45 minutes waiting for you and to show up all by myself, and you've done this so many times. And one of the things that he understood, as his friend explained, goes, oh, I'm so sorry. This is the last thing. I didn't mean to do that. But this guy was so not future-oriented, but he lived in the moment. So when he left on time to go to the door, he would run into, the doorman, and the doorman would share a story, and he was fully present with him. And then the next place, and he would just start wherever he was in the complete moment, sharing all of himself with the people that were with him. That it wasn't that he was trying to be inconsiderate. He just was in the moment and wasn't thinking ahead like we are in the West here.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So time pressured, so goal oriented, so schedule oriented, so structure oriented. And this may be, for good and for bad, that's what we are. And understanding this in our context is important. That is a good insight. And I just want to say, for those listening, we just did podcast number 1 with Dr. Proescher. There's going to be a number. We have, if you read his resume, there's definitely room for a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's got a lot of different, including a new thing, which is a master's in public health, which I'm, and research and outcome studies and all these interesting things, which I look forward to speaking with you about in the future. An expertise in mindfulness, even a little bit of hinting at how to use psychedelics, an interest in psychedelics. There's so many things that you have interest in, and I look forward to continued conversations.
Yes, great.
Thank you.
I would love to be back. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Proescher.
All right. Thank
Bye.
you, Dr. Silberstein.
This podcast is for general information and entertainment purposes only. This should not be considered treatment advice, nor is it a substitute for an individual treatment plan. If you have questions or concerns about your individual situation, it is strongly recommended you consult a licensed professional to talk about things that are specific to you. If there is an emergency, it is strongly recommended you seek treatment at your nearest emergency room.